make that thing you want salient. It has to be something that touches you, that you really feel like it's there with you and you want it. And the reason I bring that up is because salience is, it activates, if you want to call it, a bloodhound within your head, where it looks around for opportunities for you to manifest. So what I mean by that is that if you're able to embed your intention, that activates the salience network, which is the bloodhound. And the analogy is as follows. I'm sure you have been to parties and they're loud, and your name will be mentioned and you'll immediately turn, even though it's loud, because your identity is deeply embedded within you. So when you do this in terms of an intention, and I'll give a recent example. I'm working on a new project, and I was at a coffee shop. Again, loud, everybody talking. But I heard somebody specifically talk about the project, type of the thing I'm doing. So I got up and introduced myself. We connected. And that's how it works, because it creates these synchronicities, because it's always turned on, listening for opportunities, how it can make your intention happen. Well, I think if you do it correctly, they naturally occur over and over again. And you may think they're shocking and how did that happen? But that's because you have made your intention salient. It has grasped your attention network, and it is solely focused on having that happen. And once that process occurs, then you engage your executive control network to actually then respond to it. One of the process, which we talked about, having the ability on a conscious level to embed your intention, that is to, we call it value tag, which makes it important. Yes. And so once you value tag that becomes important in your subconscious, and then the networks start working together. Now, there's everybody's manifesting every day. They just do it very inefficiently, right? So when you do it efficiently, all of these things, come together to have it happen. This is why, as an example, what this woman in the magic shop did, and this was before, these ideas sort of were out there, she made me write my list of things I wanted to manifest down. Because again, when you use every sensory organ, then again, you're engaging all of these different things that go into your subconscious. So you write it down, you read it silently, you read it aloud, you look at it, you visualize, and this is what athletes do. They visualize how it's going to play out. They see themselves in that role. And the more and more you do that, the stronger that wiring gets in your brain. And therefore, that increases the chance of it happening. There was a whole process, right?
Yes.
Because, first of all, I had decided to be a doctor in fourth grade.
Right.
And this was based on a professions day where a doctor came to our class. And I was so impressed by this person that second I decided to be a doctor, because he was kind, he was thoughtful, he answered my question, he appeared interested in what I had to say. And so saying, if you're poor and you don't have resources, saying I'm going to be a doctor is easier said than done. And in fact, I did have challenges, but I'll tell you a couple stories though that tells you how the system works, even though you haven't done all the typical things to make it work. I'll tell you how I got into medical school and how I got into college. I was so clueless about college, even though I said I was going to go to college. I was in a science class and there was a girl sitting next to me and she was filling out her college application. I had no clue about that. I looked at this girl, I asked her what she was doing. She said, well, I'm applying to college. And this is the application. I said, really? And she looked at me and said, yeah. And I said, well, where are you applying to? And she said, UC Irvine. And she looked at me and she said, where are you applied? I said, UC Irvine.
Yeah.
I haven't got my application yet. She said, I have an extra one. And I filled that out. And, I got in. And that's my point is, it was in there. I didn't know how it was going to play out, but it played out. And it certainly wasn't the typical way. So then what happened is, I had a lot of struggles. I had to leave college multiple times. And so when I applied to medical school, The average GPA to get into medical school was 3.79 at that time, which is, out of 4. My GPA then was 2.5, and I was not going to graduate from college. And so I went to the pre-med, and of course, as you know, when you have all these quote-unquote friends, you say, I want to be a doctor. And, many of my friends were pre-med, and they were the type of pre-meds who had 3.7.
Sure.
And, it was very hurtful because they said, you're never going to be a doctor. That GPA, what a joke, right? Which, this is your dream. So anyway, you used to have to have an interview with the pre-med committee. So you had to go get an appointment, and then they would write a letter of recommendation for you. So I went to the office. I asked the secretary, I said, I want to make an appointment for my pre-med letter.
Yes.
She looked at me, she said, I'm not going to give you an appointment. I said, well, why? She had pulled out my file. She said, because it's a waste of everyone's time. Now, can you imagine a human being telling you that you're a waste of their time? I mean, how hurtful. But I looked at the woman and I said, I appreciate what you're saying, but I said, I am not leaving here until you give me that. I said, if you want to call security, that's fine, but I am not leaving. So she did. But imagine, so it comes time for my appointment. So I go into this room, and I'm at one end of this long table, and I'm, 20 years old maybe? And then there are these 3 people at the other end of the table. And the guy in the middle, he has my file. And he looks at me, he takes the file, lifts it, throws it on the table, and he says, say what you have to say so we can get this over with. And you sit there and, how intimidating and what a jerk, right? So what happened is I looked at the guy and I said, I am not going to let you turn me into a grade point average. I'm a human being. So I proceeded to lecture them for about 20 minutes. They were all crying at the end. Because once you show your humanity, they can't turn away from you. They can't objectify you if you're right there in front of them and force them to look at you. And so what happened is they ended up actually giving me the highest letter of recommendation. And as I was leaving, that secretary actually was in the room. She said, listen, I want you to take this. And it was a trifold brochure for a summer enrichment program at Tulane University in New Orleans for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and minority students. And she looked at me and she said, I have to tell you something, though. The deadline has passed, but I don't think that will impact you. So I called the lady, and she let me into the program. And I applied to one medical school and got into one medical school.
Wow.
And I didn't have a degree.